In the heart of Silicon Valley, a young woman began building a company that would promise to transform medicine forever in complete silence. A single drop of blood was claimed to hold the power to reveal hundreds of medical conditions instantly through revolutionary technology. Elizabeth Holmes was not just building a startup, she was selling a future that seemed too powerful to question at first glance. Inside Stanford University, she dropped out with a vision that sounded impossible but attracted attention from the world's most powerful investors. Theranos was born from ambition, secrecy, and a belief that traditional laboratories were outdated and unnecessary in modern healthcare systems. The promise was simple: eliminate large machines and replace them with a small device capable of instant blood testing anywhere. Silicon Valley saw her as the next great innovator, a woman challenging the limits of science with bold confidence and certainty. Millions of dollars began flowing into Theranos as investors rushed to be part of what they believed was medical history. Behind closed doors, however, the technology struggled to produce consistent or reliable results during critical early testing phases inside laboratories. Engineers working at Theranos began noticing serious flaws in the system that could not support the public claims being made externally. Despite internal warnings, the company continued expanding rapidly, building partnerships that increased credibility, without fully proving scientific accuracy or reliability. Elizabeth Holmes carefully controlled her public image, presenting herself with calm confidence and wearing a style inspired by iconic tech leaders. Media outlets began celebrating her as a revolutionary figure, amplifying her story across global headlines without fully understanding the hidden reality. Inside the company, pressure grew as employees worked under strict secrecy rules that discouraged questioning leadership decisions or reporting technical failures. Some engineers privately feared that the technology was unsafe for real patients, but speaking out risked professional consequences within the organization. Board members and powerful advisors continued supporting Theranos despite growing internal concerns that the system was not functioning as promised. Journalists slowly began investigating inconsistencies in the company's claims, noticing gaps between public demonstrations and internal performance reports. Every new discovery added more pressure, revealing that the truth behind Theranos might be far different from what the world believed. Silicon Valley's confidence in the company began to shift as whispers of doubt spread among investors and industry experts quietly. The foundation of Theranos was beginning to crack, even as public attention continued to grow around Elizabeth Holmes and her vision. What appeared to be a breakthrough in medicine was quietly becoming one of the most dangerous corporate illusions in modern history. The investigation intensified as journalists and insiders slowly began connecting inconsistencies that could no longer be hidden behind polished presentations and corporate branding. Theranos continued presenting itself as fully functional, even while internal testing repeatedly failed to meet the scientific standards required for medical accuracy. Within laboratories, engineers witnessed machines producing unstable results, creating a growing gap between public demonstrations and private operational reality. Elizabeth Holmes remained composed in public appearances, maintaining confidence that helped silence early doubts among investors and influential advisors. Behind the polished image, pressure inside the company escalated, as employees were reminded that secrecy was essential for survival of the vision. Some workers described an environment where questioning results was treated as betrayal rather than a necessary part of scientific development. Despite mounting internal concerns, partnerships with major organizations continued, giving Theranos a level of credibility that masked its technical instability. Medical experts outside the company struggled to verify claims because access to the technology was tightly controlled and heavily restricted. The lack of transparency became one of the earliest warning signs that something deeper might be wrong inside the organization. As scrutiny increased, Theranos responded not with openness, but with tighter internal controls and increased isolation of critical engineering teams. The technology itself became a mystery even to those working closest to it, as data was selectively shared and carefully managed. Meanwhile, the company's public narrative continued to grow stronger, fueled by media coverage that rarely questioned the underlying scientific evidence. Investors remained convinced they were witnessing a breakthrough, unaware of the widening gap between marketing claims and technical reality. Inside the labs, failed experiments were quietly repeated, while official reports continued to reflect unrealistic levels of success. The emotional tension among employees increased as they realized the system they were building might never function as promised. A small number of insiders began documenting inconsistencies, carefully gathering evidence that could later expose the truth. Journalistic curiosity deepened as anonymous tips hinted that Theranos was not what it appeared to be from the outside world. Each new piece of information suggested a pattern of deception that extended far beyond simple technical failure or misunderstanding. The company's leadership maintained strict control over messaging, ensuring that only approved narratives reached external audiences and stakeholders. But beneath the surface, the structure of Theranos was beginning to weaken under the weight of its own impossible promises. Something inside the company was approaching a breaking point, where silence would no longer be enough to contain the truth. The first cracks in the illusion became impossible to ignore as internal doubts started spreading quietly through trusted circles inside Silicon Valley. A few journalists began receiving anonymous warnings suggesting that Theranos technology did not perform as advertised during real medical testing conditions. Each new inquiry revealed deeper contradictions between public demonstrations and the actual performance of said devices inside controlled laboratory environments. Elizabeth Holmes continued appearing in high-profile events, projecting confidence, while internal teams struggled to maintain even basic operational consistency. The company's silence toward critics only increased suspicion, as questions about accuracy were met with carefully controlled statements instead of clear answers. Inside the labs, engineers worked under constant pressure to fix problems that seemed to grow faster than any solution could contain. The gap between leadership promises and scientific reality widened into something that could no longer be dismissed as temporary failure. Some employees began realizing they were part of a system built more on belief than on proven technological success. Medical professionals outside the company grew increasingly concerned that patients could be affected if inaccurate results were ever used in real diagnosis. Despite these concerns, Theranos continued expanding partnerships, presenting itself as a validated solution in modern healthcare innovation. Behind closed doors, however, data manipulation and selective reporting created a version of reality that supported the company's public narrative. The culture inside Theranos became increasingly tense, as fear of retaliation discouraged open discussion of technical failures or ethical concerns. Even senior engineers found themselves isolated when raising questions about the reliability of core testing systems. The emotional burden inside the company grew heavier as employees realized the system they were building might never meet medical standards. Journalists slowly pieced together fragments of information that suggested systematic suppression of internal warnings and scientific objections. Every investigation uncovered another layer of inconsistency, revealing how carefully controlled the company's external image truly was. Investors still believed in the vision, but subtle doubts began emerging as technical explanations failed to match public claims. The company's leadership responded by tightening internal communication and restricting access to critical operational data. This increased secrecy only deepened external suspicion, as silence often reveals more than any official statement ever could. At this stage, the foundation of Theranos was no longer stable. It was slowly collapsing under pressure from truth itself. And what was coming next would turn a celebrated startup into one of the most shocking revelations in Silicon Valley history. The investigation reached a turning point as regulators and journalists began coordinating evidence that suggested systemic deception inside Theranos operations and testing procedures. Internal documents started leaking slowly, revealing discrepancies between reported success rates and actual performance data recorded in laboratory environments over multiple years. Elizabeth Holmes continued presenting confidence in public interviews, insisting the company's technology was being misunderstood by critics and outsiders alike. But inside the organization, fear replaced ambition as employees realized the scale of the gap between reality and public claims. Engineers who once believed in the mission now questioned whether the system had ever truly worked as promised from the beginning. Medical experts reviewing the limited available data concluded that many test results could not meet basic clinical reliability standards required for patient safety. Despite this, Theranos maintained strict control over its messaging, ensuring that only approved information reached media outlets and investors. The pressure inside the company intensified as teams were forced to defend results that they themselves could not consistently reproduce. Whistleblowers began to emerge quietly, risking their careers to reveal what they believed was a dangerous breakdown in scientific integrity. Each new revelation added momentum to the growing storm, drawing national attention to what was once Silicon Valley's most celebrated startup. Journalists uncovered evidence suggesting that demonstrations shown to investors were not always powered by the same technology used in real testing environments. This discovery shifted the entire narrative, turning admiration into suspicion almost overnight across technology and financial communities worldwide. Inside Theranos, leadership responded with denial and legal pressure, attempting to control the narrative before it spiraled further out of control. But the damage was already spreading beyond containment as public trust began eroding faster than the company could respond. Regulatory scrutiny increased sharply, forcing closer examination of claims that had previously gone unchallenged in the rush of innovation enthusiasm. Employees described a workplace filled with silence, where uncertainty grew heavier than any official statement released by leadership. The illusion of stability was breaking, apart piece by piece as contradictions became impossible to hide under public attention. Investors who once praised the vision now began demanding answers that the company struggled to provide with credibility or evidence. And as the truth moved closer to exposure, Theranos found itself standing on the edge of irreversible collapse. A full-scale investigation by federal authorities began closing in as evidence of medical and financial misconduct started forming a clear and disturbing pattern. Theranos attempted to defend its operations, but internal inconsistencies made it increasingly difficult to maintain a unified public explanation. Former employees started cooperating with investigators, revealing how data was selectively edited to match public claims presented to investors. Each testimony added weight to the growing case that the company's breakthrough technology had never functioned at the level it advertised. Elizabeth Holmes and her inner circle maintained control over communications, but pressure from regulators continued escalating without pause. Inside the company, morale collapsed as employees realized the situation was no longer a technical problem, but a legal and ethical crisis. The once celebrated innovation story was now being re-examined as a potential case of large-scale corporate fraud. Medical professionals reviewing subpoenaed materials confirmed that some reported results could have endangered patients if used in real diagnoses. The seriousness of the findings shifted the investigation from skepticism into full-scale legal accountability. Media coverage intensified as global attention focused on how one startup had convinced some of the world's most powerful investors. Silicon Valley began distancing itself from Theranos as reputational damage spread across associated individuals and institutions. Elizabeth Holmes continued defending the company publicly, insisting that the accusations misunderstood the complexity of their technology. However, investigators uncovered evidence showing that critical demonstrations had been staged under controlled conditions, not reflective of real operations. This revelation became a turning point, permanently damaging the credibility of the entire organization. Inside the company, communication broke down completely as employees struggled to understand what was true and what had been constructed. Legal pressure increased as subpoenas, audits, and interviews expanded across multiple departments and facilities. The company's internal structure began disintegrating under the weight of documentation, testimony, and scientific evaluation. What once appeared as a revolutionary medical breakthrough was now being reconstructed as a carefully maintained illusion. And as federal scrutiny deepened, the final phase of Theranos was already beginning to unfold.